So everything takes me about 5 times longer. If it takes you an hour to do something, it takes me about 5 hours to do the same thing. So it's kind of a 1 to 5 ratio. If you are able to understand what your purpose is, and you are able to understand what your mission is and your reason for creation, that gives you the energy and the ability to achieve what you set out to do. And I think it's just that notion that you're part of something bigger and grander than yourself. And when you're able to live your life with that as an expectation, that can be a very powerful mission.
Welcome to Ordinary People with Extraordinary Stories. I'm Chana Weisberg, host of this podcast. Joining me today, I have an incredibly interesting guest. His name is Justice Richard Bernstein. Thank you so much for joining us,
Oh, it's
Richard
a pleasure
Bernstein.
to be with you, and you have a wonderful program. It
Oh, thank you.
inspires and excites people. It really elevates folks. So I hope that you'll keep doing this for a very long time because it makes a huge difference for countless numbers of people.
Thank you so much for your kind words. So, I just want to introduce you to our audience. Justice Bernstein is on the Michigan Supreme Court, and he is also blind, and he's the first blind justice. So, he has an incredible story, and I am so excited to hear all about it. So, can you start off, Justice Richard, with your childhood? Tell us a little about your family, your background, your childhood, how you were
Well,
born, and what impact it had.
I think that I'm an excellent product of special education. So when people talk about why do we put so much resource and energy into special education programs and services, I think this is why. And
Mhm.
ultimately, I went through special ed, but I had a family that really believed that anything and everything was possible and that whatever you wanted to do, it could happen. And I think that incredible support that exists within a family makes all the difference in what you're able to do. But in addition to that, I was blessed because I had an incredible education and I had fantastic educators. I had incredible teachers. I had incredible counselors, Mr. Ruggiero, who just believed that this was possible and that anything that you believed in could happen and that you shouldn't be limited from being able to do what you set out to do. And I think that's the important combination that exists is the ability to have an incredible family supportive structure, but you also have to have people outside the family. You have to have a teacher, you have to have a counselor, you have to have people that are external to your
Mhm.
family that have that same belief system and that give you that same impetus to move forward to ultimately allow for you to reach the expectations that you set for yourself.
Wow. I mean, that's incredible. When you were going through your childhood, through your elementary schooling or your high school, did you find that your peers were supportive? Was there bullying that you encountered at
Yeah,
all?
I think being the only blind person did result in that. Just being different kind of
Mhm.
resulted in the fact that, you drew attention to yourself and sometimes it wasn't always in the best way. So yeah, you did have to face some bullies and some people that made things a little bit difficult and a little bit hard. But I think where the blessing came in was that I had a wonderful circle of friends. And I think
Mhm.
if you can have like a nice circle of friends that surround you, that makes a huge difference in your ability to be able to be successful.
Wow. Wow. So I guess it didn't deter you. The bullies didn't stop you or make
No,
any
because
scars?
not really, because ultimately they didn't make it easy. They didn't make it pleasant.
Mhm.
But what I think was important was just having this wonderful circle of people that were in your life that allowed you to kind of get through it that made all the difference.
Wow. So, I mean, it's more than just, getting through education. What you've done is absolutely incredible. Just for a person who doesn't have a disability to become a lawyer, then become a Supreme Court justice is not what your typical average person is
Right.
said to do.
But it was something that I believed in, and I did it for the good. It's just the idea that you have to believe that you're part of something bigger than yourself. And if
Mhm.
you believe that you're part of something greater or bigger than oneself, that gives you the impetus, the energy, and the ability to make it through.
So, what do you feel you're bigger? Like, what is it that you feel you're part of?
You feel that you're part of a bigger mission, you're part of a bigger
Mhm,
story, that ultimately that you're doing something that really matters, something that could make a difference, something that could, have a real impact. But that you feel as though you're part of something, that isn't really just about yourself, but is really about the world in large, and that you're able to play a small role in an ultimately bigger plan. And sometimes if you are able to understand what your purpose is, and you are able to understand what your mission is, and your reason for creation, that gives you the energy and the ability to achieve what you set out to do. And I think it's just that notion that you're part of something bigger and grander than yourself. And when you're
mhm.
able to live your life with that as an expectation, that can be a very powerful mission.
That is very powerful. So how long have you felt that? How like,
I
since
think
at
it's
one
been
point
kind
did
of throughout my entire life. I've just always
Mhm,
had that belief that, like, hopefully you're doing something and it's for a bigger purpose or a bigger mission, and that ultimately that there's a reason behind it, and that you're doing it for that reason.
mhm. Did you ever feel bad for yourself? Did you ever like, feel, "Oh, why
No,
me?"
not really, because I just think that ultimately I had such a great background and came from such a great family and
Mhm.
had such great experiences in my life that I was blessed to be able to live them.
Wow. So when you were going into law school and, becoming a lawyer is quite a feat as itself. It takes a lot of discipline and a lot of studying. Tell us a little about what that was like. Like, how did you study even? How did
Well,
you learn all these books and books that you needed to go through and read?
so everything takes me about 5 times longer. If it takes you an hour to do something, it takes me about 5 hours to do the same thing. So it's kind of a
Wow.
1 to 5 ratio.
Hmm.
So ultimately, I just had a team of readers that I worked with, and we would basically just work 7 days a week in order to keep
Mm.
up with the readings and the materials. And so for me, it was just a game of trying to keep up and not fall behind and stay on top of what everybody else was doing. But most importantly, it was, you had a great team of people that were with you, and you just had to kind of keep working and doing whatever you could to just get through it.
Hmm. And what kept you motivated? Was it that drive for purpose and mission that you spoke
Yeah,
about?
it was that notion of just becoming a lawyer and how much I wanted it, and
Mm.
how much, I just believed in it, and just what I knew I could do with it. That if I had the chance to get a law license, that I would make it count, and that I would be able to do great things with it, and that I'd be able to have an impact with it. So ultimately, it just made the want and the need and the drive even higher and harder.
And I understood you did do, like, tremendous things with it. You tell us a little about the things that you
So
did when you
I
were there.
I did all public service, or pro bono, which means for the good, which is I
Mhm,
never charged for legal representation, and I would
mm,
represent folks who otherwise couldn't afford legal representation. So I took on really complicated, really challenging cases that nobody else would take on, or that people didn't want to really have to get involved with because there was no money in it. But I
mm,
never really cared if there was money in it or not. I just wanted to do it because I believed in what I was doing, and I believed that it was important, and I believed that it really mattered. So I dedicated myself to doing it. So I represented paralyzed veterans and made sure that bus systems were accessible, so that if you needed to use a wheelchair lift, the bus would have a chair lift that would operate and function correctly. And the case that I had against the Department of Transportation in Detroit ultimately set a national precedent for all public transit systems all across the country. So
wow,
now, whenever you see the low floor buses in anywhere in the United States, that came out of the Detroit bus case. So it was a
mm,
very significant case that made a real difference, because it changed how bus systems and fixed route systems all across the country operate and function. I had the same case against the airline industry because I wanted it to be accessible so that people with disabilities could fly. And our
mm,
case set the national standards and guidelines for accessibility in air travel, which allowed for people in wheelchairs, or allowed for people with disabilities to be able to travel in a way that they weren't able to travel before. So that was a very unique and exciting case that really did translate to making aviation more open, accessible, and accommodating to people who otherwise weren't able to travel so easily. And that was a case I really
That's
took
really
pride in.
amazing.
Yeah, and
Yeah, that's amazing.
I had another case about roundabouts where they were building roundabouts, but not putting traffic control devices in. So people with disabilities couldn't cross the street safely. So
Mm,
that case set the standard for roundabout construction, in which now, whenever a roundabout is built in the United States, they have to put in the Hawk system, which is a traffic control device that makes it safe for people with disabilities to use and access the roundabout. So those are the types of cases that I used to handle. Everything from U.S. aviation to public transportation to education to road construction. One of the big cases I handled was against the University of Michigan, where I used to be a professor. And that case set national standards and national guidelines for how you build commercial facilities. So the
mm.
concept of alteration versus repair was determined by the University of Michigan case. And it set the national benchmark and the national standards for how a commercial facility is to be constructed.
Wow, this is incredible. So you were doing all this amazing work, all pro bono,
Yes, all
and
for
work.
free.
Wow, incredible, and all work for people who for with disabilities in order to
Correct.
promote justice for them.
Correct.
So what
Primarily
what
veterans.
wow. So what made you decide then to go to become on the Supreme Court?
Well, I realized that you had to change the system because judges didn't have a full understanding of the challenges that those that came before them had. And I determined that ultimately, as a disabled person, this was something that I could do that would help to make a change.
Mm,
That would make things easier and better for those that had to come before people. And I just thought that running for the Supreme Court, which it's a statewide election in which the entire state votes, and I've been
mm.
elected twice now to this position, but the entire
Wow.
state votes on who's going to serve as a Supreme Court justice. But I came to determine or came to realize that this was actually very important because you were able to change the entire system and you were
Mm,
able to change an entire structure of how things operate and how things work. And I thought that was an incredibly meaningful thing that I really wanted to be a part of, because that way, when you came before a judge, they'd have a better understanding or appreciation of the challenges and obstacles that people face in daily lives. And most judges didn't have that understanding. They didn't have that appreciation. So I felt by running for the highest court, it would allow for that to extend to the judges who are overseeing the system and would ultimately make for, like, I know this expression has been used over, but a kinder and gentler system in
mm.
which people that had disabilities, when they came in front of a judge, would have someone who had a greater understanding or appreciation of what it is they have to experience on a daily basis.
Hmm. You're talking about it as if it was just so straightforward, but I'm sure it was, like, so hard to accomplish and to become that way, to pursue it, to be dedicated to it, and to get to your goal.
Well, I've done it for 10 years now. I've been on the Supreme Court and
Mm.
I've gone through 2 election cycles, and
Wow.
a lot of people question whether a blind person could actually do this. Was
Mm,
this something that a blind person could accomplish? Was this something that a blind person could actually achieve? And what was interesting was that the people of our great state said that absolutely, someone who's
mhm,
blind can definitely do this job. They can
mhm.
definitely serve in this position. And people across the state of Michigan were willing to be supportive. And I think that made a huge difference and really had a big impact on how things developed.
That's incredible. That's really incredible. Now, I understand that beside for you being a lawyer, a professor, and a judge, you also are a marathon runner.
Yes, I've done 27 marathons and a full Ironman competition.
Oh my gosh, wow. How do you do that?
So you run with a team of guides and they give you directional cues: hard right, hard left, soft left, and you follow their directional cues as you're running.
Mm,
So the way you run a marathon is that you go out, you run on a tether, and you have a guide that's going to give you these directional signals. They're going to tell you right, hard left, soft left. And you
mhm,
follow those directional cues as you're running the course. Now, for an Ironman, it's a little bit more difficult because you've got to swim, bike, and run. So it's a 2.4
mm,
mile swim, 112-mile bike, and a 26.2-mile run. And,
Wow.
in order to do that, imagine just picturing diving into a frigid body of water where you're not able to see where you're going and what's around you. And you're not able to communicate with your guide because your guide's underwater and so are you. So you're not able to communicate with each other. So you can't hear each other as you're swimming. So that presents some unique challenges and some unique issues. So what happens when you're not able to communicate is your guide will tug at the rope so you can feel the lasso that's around you, and it will tug you in certain directions. So if he tugs you to the right, you know that it moves you to the right. If he tugs you to the left, you know that it moves you to the left. So he'll tug at that lasso,
Mm.
and that's your indication as to which direction you're supposed to swim. But being the only disabled person in the competition, you get kicked by all the other swimmers. They don't mean to do it. It's just kind of a natural reaction that happens, when you're swimming in that kind of a competition. So you repeatedly get kicked by all the other swimmers, and being blind, you can't brace for it. So you just get kicked in the
Mm.
face, but you're
Mm.
not able to prepare yourself for the impact or for the ultimate experience you're going to have when you get kicked in the face. So it doesn't make things easy.
Wow.
But then
No.
on top of that, other swimmers become entangled and ensnared in your rope, and as they
Mm.
become entangled and ensnared, the rope starts taking you below the surface. And as the rope takes you below the surface, you're not able to break free. You can't get the oxygen that you so desperately need. And so you learn a very valuable lesson that I think Chabad teaches. You learn that ultimately, the body and the spirit are joined. But if
Mm.
you allow for the spirit to disconnect from the body, the spirit can ultimately transform and guide the body if given the opportunity to do so. But so often the spirit and the body become so intertwined that the body can control the spirit. But if you allow the spirit and the body to disconnect from each other, then ultimately what happens is that something very powerful happens where you then allow for the spirit to ultimately guide the body. And if the
Mm.
spirit can guide the body, then the spirit is able to ultimately direct the body to ultimately achieve the things that you need to achieve. So during the swim and the bike and the run, it's the spirit that disconnects from the body. And by the spirit disconnecting from the body, the spirit guides the body through the challenges of that course.
Mm. So you're saying that throughout your life, you've had this spiritual guidance from your
The
spirit?
spiritual guidance, and then ultimately trying to separate and distinguish the spirit from the body
Mm. Wow.
so that the
S
spirit and the body don't just become one, but
Mhm.
more so that the spirit and the body are separate and apart from each other, and that you allow the spirit to power the body.
Mhm. It sounds like your spiritual guide is constantly guiding you in terms of what you're doing, in terms of, your dedication to people, your dedication to the veterans, your dedication to your pro bono activities, to becoming a judge, to everything that you do. What motivates you?
I think it's just, again, it goes back to what we were talking about before, which
Mhm.
is that general idea that you're doing this for other people, and that you're
Mm.
doing this because you're part of something bigger and grander than yourself. And
Mhm.
you're doing this because you want to serve and do better for others. You want
Mm.
others to benefit from what you're doing, and that you understand and appreciate the plan that you're a part of. And so
Mm.
as a result, you're just going to continue to move forward. But more importantly, you're moving forward because it goes to that understanding of why you were created and what you were ultimately sent to do. And I think people who live their life with a sense of purpose and mission tend to live a richer, fuller life because they realize why they were created and they understand what they were sent here to do.
Hmm. Do you look at the disability that God gave you as something that is holding you back or something that
No, I think
that
it gives you a greater sense of mission. I think it
Mm.
gives you a greater sense of ability, but I think
Mhm.
it's mission oriented, and I think that ultimately it allows for you to understand and appreciate that you have a heightened mission, and that you have a
Mm.
heightened purpose, and that you're here for something more or something greater. So it gives you that sense of purpose. It gives you that sense of focus. It gives you that sense of mission that drives you forward in a very powerful way.
Hmm. Wow. I mean, this is incredible. What happens when you feel that your struggle is bigger than what you can handle? What do
I
you
don't
do?
think that really happens too often. I think that, it's as long as you're doing it for the right reasons and you're
Mhm,
doing it for the right thing and you're on the side of the angels, I
mhm,
think you're going to have what you need. You know, it might be difficult or challenging or hard, but you know that you're on the side of right and that you're doing something for the side of right. And when that develops and when you have that feeling, it can be a very overpowering and very exhilarating type feeling that just gives you that sense of, wow, I'm doing something that really matters.
hmm. Incredible. I know one time when you were having one of your runs, you got into an accident as well.
Yes. And I
Tell us
was
a little about that.
so I got hit by a bicyclist that was going about 35 miles an hour in Central Park,
Mm,
and it shattered my entire body. And
mm,
ultimately, it my entire body just got completely shattered. So I was hospitalized for over 10 weeks
wow.
and basically had to learn how to do everything from the very beginning. Had to learn how to walk again, had to learn how to just, function as an individual. But I had to
Mhm,
do everything from the very beginning and had to start all over again. And that was a very trying experience, just basically because being stuck in a hospital, you miss all those little things in life. You miss just going out with your friends, or you miss going to a restaurant, or you miss having a Shabbat dinner. You miss all the things that people take for granted you aren't able to do because you're having to be in the hospital. And
mm,
so it teaches you to appreciate and value life at its essence and life at its core. And you realize that you want to appreciate all the little things in life and never take those things for granted. Now it's funny because I still feel a lot of pain from that accident. So,
mhm,
I still feel because it shattered like everything. So I still feel a tremendous amount of pain and discomfort that comes as a result of going through a situation or a circumstance like that was, very painful and quite traumatic. And you still feel that pain today. But I still run marathons. I just finished my 27th marathon and this happened, after my 17th marathon.
mm,
So my 18th marathon was, my times really, started to suffer and were very slow. But my 18 marathon was, the hardest because it was, even though it was my 18th, it was the first after a catastrophic injury. So even though it was mile 18, it was still the first marathon after going through a major, major injury. And how to run with a major injury was an entirely new experience that had to be learned. You had to learn how to deal with the pain. You had to learn how to deal with the fact that this was going to hurt, and it was going to hurt in ways that you couldn't imagine or even believe. But you
mm,
ran with that pain and you ran with that struggle and you got it done. But it was one of those situations where it was a real struggle with God because, at a certain point, you have to come to find a peace. And
mhm,
I was able to make my peace with my new circumstance and situation, but I was also able to make my peace, with Hashem at mile
mhm,
18 because the pain was so severe and so intensive and so massive that working through it was just an unbelievably challenging ordeal. But I realized that I was able to actually do it. And, with God's help, I was able to make that kind of level of peace or find a peace with Him. And that I was able to make a peace with God and say, okay, this is my new circumstance, my new situation. And through all the pain, I was still able to reach the finish line.
wow. So how did you make peace with God? How
I
or
think it
do
was
you
just
did you
the
feel that
ang
God is on your side, or do
No,
you feel like he's against you?
it was more just that you get to a point in life where you have a certain anger and a certain
Mm,
rage,
mhm,
and you have to express that rage and express that anger because you're angry and you're frustrated, and you have to allow for that to be able to express that
mhm,
frustration. You have to be able to express that level of anger. You have to be able to express that level of hurt. And I
mhm,
think the ability to, and think through marathon running, the ability to find a way to express how you really feel, how upset you are, how angry you are, you ultimately, after you do that, you're able to find that peace within inside you. And you're able to
Mhm.
find that peace that exists, and that peace transcends and gives you the impetus and the ability to move forward and do what you're setting out to do.
Wow. I know when you were in that hospital, Rabbi Chaim Milevsky came very
Yes,
often
yes.
to you, and he's the one that actually introduced me to you.
Oh, he's
Um,
wonderful. He made a huge
he
difference.
is.
He came every day, and he made a huge difference. We would wrap tefillin, he would bring food. It was a wonderful thing that he did, and he made a huge difference in my life, and I basically owe the fact that I was able to move on with my life and ultimately find a and ultimately move on and do things, to his graciousness and his kindness. Made a huge,
Mm,
overwhelming difference. And it just shows you that one person can make a huge difference when they're willing to be there for you the way that he was. And the impact that he had a huge impact on me. And that
mm,
had an impact on countless other people that we took on cases and did things that we otherwise wouldn't have done. And there are people who are living lives today that they otherwise wouldn't be living if it wasn't for Rabbi Alefsky, because he was the one that gave me the impetus to do what I do today.
hmm. How's
So it's
that?
just
Because he believed
because
in
he
you?
was
Because he
he was so generous and so kind that he
Mhm,
allowed for me to get through a very overwhelming and very difficult ordeal.
hmm. And I understand. Sorry, go ahead.
No, no,
You
and I
were
was
gonna
gonna
say
say,
yeah.
and after getting through that ordeal, it
Mhm,
just goes back to the idea that you become grateful and you wanna pay it back, so you do other
mhm.
things to help other people as a way to kind of allow for things to run full circle.
Wow. I understand that you asked Rabbi Levsky how you can pay him back, and he said, "Just keep sharing your message with other Chabad," and since then,
Right.
you've spoken to so many Chabad centers.
Well, Chabad centers are great places. They have wonderful communities. They have incredible people. They're very warm, kind places with incredibly warm people. And they have a tremendous positive energy and spirit and vitality. And when you tap into that energy, it's an incredibly empowering and incredibly exciting and fulfilling feeling.
Hmm.
Like right now, I'm in Los Angeles, and we're
Mhm.
at a Chabad here in LA, and they had well over probably near 300 people at their dinner, and
Hmm.
it was an incredible community of people. You couldn't find a nicer community of people, and it was an incredible experience to be a part of it.
Incredible. Wow. And when you heard about the Rebbe's approach to diversity and inclusion, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think that, everyone tells the story about how when the rabbi met the soldiers that had disabilities and he really talked to them about the fact that they have an incredible ability. I think when the rabbi speaks to that, Chabads will accept everybody.
Mhm.
And, if not all synagogues and not all places of worship are going to be open to accepting people that have severe disabilities, whether they're cognitive or whether they're physical disabilities, not all places are willing to take on people with
Mhm.
disabilities. Just ask parents of disabled children or special needs kids. And
Mhm.
Chabad will always take that child. Chabad will always accept that family. They will never exclude a family, and they will never turn anybody away. They will always, always be there to help people.
Mhm. Wow. Is that why you felt close to Chabad?
Yeah, I think so, because sometimes your more traditional synagogues aren't going to be as open and aren't going to be as willing to be as accommodating as a Chabad center is to people with, let's say, children with autism or Down syndrome or cerebral palsy or other types of, challenging cognitive conditions. But
Mhm.
Chabad is willing to take on those children and take on those families and make them a part of the community. They will
Hmm.
never, ever say no, and they'll never turn anyone away from a community that they are destined to be a part of.
Hmm. What would you like people to know about disabilities that maybe we don't know or we should know in terms of how we deal with people with disabilities?
I think the key is just understand that they're on a mission,
Mhm.
understand that they have their purpose, understand that they have their goal, understand that they just have their reason for being there, and allow for them to fulfill their purpose, allow for them to fulfill their mission, allow for them to do what they're ultimately sent here to do.
Mhm. Is there things that we should do to be more inclusive or less, more sensitive to their needs?
I think it's with families with special needs children, like if you have families with autism or
Mhm.
families with Down syndrome or families that, especially with cognitive impairments, I think that it's very difficult to get a Jewish education if your
Mm.
child has a cognitive impairment. Chabad will be supportive, but not all Jewish schools are going to basically be open to, like, for example, I couldn't get a Jewish education because
Mhm.
there's no way the schools could support me. It's very
Mhm.
expensive to take on a disabled child. So if I wanted to get a Jewish education, I wasn't going to be able to do that. That was something that just simply wasn't going to happen,
Mm.
because it was just too expensive or too costly for your traditional Jewish day school to allow for somebody with a severe disability to be able to come to that school. So I think
Mhm.
a lot of this starts with education and basically opening the doors and making sure that schools, and there are wonderful programs like Gateways and other such programs. Like, I know the Rudermans are doing great work on this, but
Mm.
the key is that, if there are schools that are willing to take on children and families with disabilities, that the community should be supportive financially, so that if there's a school that says, you know what, look, we'd like to take a blind child and give him a Jewish education, or we realize that this child has autism, but we'd like them to have a Jewish education, that, ultimately the schools have funding that they can go to so that they can accept those students and be able to educate them and have the resources to do it.
Hmm. That's
That's what's
important.
that's what's very important. Jewish education for all Jewish families and Jewish students, regardless of whatever the challenge or difficulty of that family might have, they should be given the opportunity to have a Jewish education. And nobody
Mm.
should be turned away from being able to be Jewish and being able to educate their family or educate themselves as Jewish children.
Hmm. Wow. And
That's
what would you
very important, and I just think
Sure.
that, but the schools need money, they need support to do
Mhm.
that. So, you
Mhm.
can't get upset with the schools for not providing a Jewish education if the schools don't have the funding or the financial wherewithal to be able to do it.
Right, absolutely. And what would you say to people who are listening to this interview, people with disabilities who might be feeling a little frustrated with what they are facing or the challenges in their life, or even people without disabilities who are just suffering from whatever challenges they are facing? You have such a positive can-do-it attitude. What would you say to these people when they are feeling rather down?
I think it's just one day at a time. You just take everything
Mhm.
one day, one step at a time. And usually, if you can get through today, tomorrow will usually be a better day. Or
Mm.
sometimes it won't be, but it just has to be that it's one day at a time, one step at a time, one move at a time. And if you take everything one day at a time and also learn the power of adaptation, if you're able to adapt to a difficult circumstance, if you're able to adapt to a unique challenge, if you're able to adapt to a lifestyle or a life that you don't want, but that is one that you're ultimately given, that can be a very powerful methodology. So the power comes in finding an ability to adapt to a circumstance or to a situation that can allow for you to move forward.
And is that by accepting that this is God's will?
I think it's not as much by accepting that it's God's will, but it's just that notion of trying to figure out a way to make it work.
Mm,
If you're able to adapt to it and just simply say, okay, you know what? I'm going to adapt to this circumstance. I'm going to adapt to this situation. I'm going to adapt to this lifestyle. I'm going to find a way to adapt to this overwhelming circumstance or this, life that I now have to live. If you
mhm,
can find a way to adapt, that will give you the power to thrive and the
mm,
power to move forward.
mhm. Beautiful. That's
So
really
that's the
beautiful.
key, the key, because you don't always get to recover. You don't always get to go back to how things were. But if you're
Mhm,
able to do it and if you're able to adapt and find a way to adapt, then you're going to be able to find a way to live a life of meaning and purpose.
mhm. What do you feel was your biggest challenge?
I think my biggest challenge as a person who is blind or a person who is disabled is I've been able to get through those challenges. So now I have a job that I have, a lot of support, and I have a great staff and a great team that I work with. So now I've basically am able to settle in because I've been able to get to where I want to get to. So it's not as difficult. And now I'm able to go and do programs and events like this where ultimately we can bring other people along with us and,
Mm.
do things that are going to get people inspired and excited and do something that's going to be positive and ultimately life changing for people.
Hmm, beautiful, wow. I know you went to visit Israel, many years several years ago, and you spoke to people who were victims of terrorist attacks who had disabilities. What would you say to those people today who are victims of the terrorist attacks and who have disabilities?
Well, I would just simply say that there's not much you really can say, and
Mm,
especially to the families of hostages and people that have gone through just indescribable horrors.
mhm,
I,
mhm,
I don't think there are, just like when you go to a shiva, right? And
mhm,
you don't really talk to you don't approach the mourners. You wait for the mourners to approach you.
mhm,
So there are no magic words. There are no comments. There are no pieces of advice that you can sometimes give that are going to make a difference. Sometimes you just have to listen to what people have to say and
mm,
just be there for them and be supportive. But, there's no, when people are going through very difficult times, there's no magic words.
mhm,
There's nothing that you can say to someone that's going to make them feel better. You just
mhm,
that because it's not like you're going to share with them something that they haven't thought of. There's
mm,
nothing that you're going to say that's going to make somebody feel better. I think the key to it is just showing empathy, showing
mm,
understanding, showing the ability to hear what they have to say, and trying to make a connection. And also make sure that they have, the resources that they need in order to do what they need to do. So,
mm,
try to make life easier for them. Whatever you can do to make life a little easier. If it's a soldier that's lost an arm, or if it's a person that's going through post traumatic stress disorder, a lot of it is resource driven. If the people, have one less thing to worry about, if like, if there's charities that have the resources and the money to, allow for these people to get the treatment that they need, or have access to the technology that they might need, those are the things that really matter. And those are the things that really make a difference. So at the end of the day, it's about trying to make life a little bit easier for people. It's not always about having all the answers, but it's
mm,
really just about how can I make life easier for this person? And a lot of that is just through generosity, and it's through tzedakah, and it's through charity, and it's
mm,
through allowing for caregivers to basically be able to do their work and do their job. But it really comes down to the idea of making life easier for people who simply need it to be a little bit easier.
that's beautiful,
If you
that's really
remove the
beautiful.
challenges, that
Mhm,
makes it a little bit better. Let people focus on what they have to focus on in order to get through the day. But if you
mhm,
can make their life just a little bit easier, if you can, so that they don't have other stresses or other struggles that they have to deal with, then you
mm,
can make life better for a lot of folks by just making it easier. Because that's really what it's about, trying to
mhm.
make life just a little bit easier for people who really need it.
Right, wow. What about Judaism most inspires you, or which mitzvah are you most connected to?
Oh, I don't know. I think it's just anything that deals with kindness, anything
Mhm,
that deals with inclusion. But I think the
mhm,
biggest one is just the notion of community and having a sense and spirit of community. That to me is the thing that makes the biggest difference, is just being able to be a part of a community. And I think Judaism fosters community in the most remarkable way. But that's the key. It's being able to be a part of a community, and
mm,
having community where you just have that sense of community gives you a sense of belonging. And to live life with a community really allows for you to live a great life, because everybody needs community to survive, not just
mm,
humans but animals, everybody. And so I think it's just that sense of community that Judaism fosters and Judaism brings, that is, for me, the thing that is the most valuable thing that Judaism provides for.
mhm. And I guess Shabbat dinners and holiday
Those types
meals
of
and all
things.
that. Right,
Anything
that
that
all brings it
fosters
together.
right, anything that fosters community, anything
Mhm,
that fosters a sense of belonging, anything
mhm,
that fosters a sense of coming together, anything
mhm.
that fosters a sense of you belong in this community or you belong here. That's what makes Judaism meaningful and purposeful.
Hmm. Did you have any difficulties as a Jew being a part of the being a justice in the Supreme Court, or was there no.
No, no,
No.
I didn't find
Mm,
and I ran for this position and I was elected, and my
right.
last name is Bernstein, and,
Right.
people had
That's
no
comforting.
issue exactly, there were no issues, there were no problems, there was no anti-Semitism, there was nothing. It was people were very accepting and open to having a Jewish person serve on the court.
And what about your being blind, your
That
disability?
that turned out to be an advantage because it allowed for a greater level of connection with people. They respected your challenge, they respected your difficulty, they respected your hardship, they
Mm,
respected it. They respected the fact that you had faced some challenges and difficulties in life, and that
mhm.
allowed for you to have a the general perception is that it allowed for you to have a greater understanding and appreciation of the challenges and hardships that other people had to face and had to contend with.
Right, wow. I wanna read a quote from you, and you said, "Being blind has made me more empathetic and more understanding of what others are going through. It makes me wanna do good for others." Do you
Yes,
see
and
your
that's
do
what
you
it
see your
does.
blindness as something that's a gift?
Well, it's just a way of life,
Mm,
and but it gives you I wouldn't say it's a gift, but I would say that it is a level of purpose,
mhm,
that you wake up every day and you have a sense of purpose, you have a sense of drive, you have a sense of determination that pushes you forward. So it gives you a purpose. It gives
mm,
you an understanding, and I think it's the understanding that comes with it that again goes back to being mission oriented.
mhm, and I guess we all have to find that thing that in each of us that gives us the purpose and that mission for each of
Exactly.
us.
So mine's just easier to find and understand. So perhaps that is
Mm,
kind of a blessing. That notion that, oh, well, you're given something that's easy to understand. So now you can understand and appreciate and relate to what your mission and what your focus ultimately is. So
mhm,
therein lies the blessing that comes with it is okay, now you have an appreciation, you have an understanding, you have an awareness that you otherwise would not have had. So it becomes more readily apparent what your overall mission and goal is going to be.
wow, incredible. Is there anything in the future for you? What are your plans? I mean, you're a lawyer
I
you were
think,
a lawyer, a professor, a
well,
judge, a marathon runner.
well, I think I'm just going to stay in my position as Supreme Court Justice. I'll run again for reelection. I'll probably, hopefully, serve there for another 20 years at least,
Mhm,
and serve in this position and continue to serve in this position, which is my hope if the voters allow me to do so. So it's the idea of doing that, and then on top of being a judge, do more programs like this. Have a chance to go into communities. Have a chance to go and be a part of any Chabad community that is interested in having me come. I would
mm,
love to be able to do it. I would find it to be an incredible gift, an incredible joy to be able to do that. So for me, anybody that allows me to have the chance to come and participate in their community, there's no community I've gone to that I haven't been overwhelmed by the support and kindness and generosity of the community. So it's
mm,
just been an amazing experience being able to travel and go to Chabad communities because you realize when you go to these communities how special every one of them is. And every
mm,
community I've been to through Chabad has been just a really remarkable experience and something that I have come to enjoy and come to love more than anything. So my goal is just to serve as a justice, keep doing the work as a justice, and then travel to go to as many Chabad communities as possible. So to continue doing this kind of work. And also for me, it's a great experience for me because it gives me a chance to meet a new community.
mm,
And every community I've been to is a community I've really enjoyed. So it's really enriched my life. And it's been a wonderful blessing for me to be introduced to all these wonderful places, wonderful communities, and wonderful events that Chabad hosts. So the more events I go to, the more communities I visit, the happier I become and the more meaningful it gets.
Oh, wow. Is there any, place in particular that stands out that was remarkable or any interesting
Uh,
story or
I
inspirational?
think I think all of them. I've never gone
Mhm,
to a community that I didn't enjoy. Every
mhm,
community I've been to through Chabad has been just a wonderful experience that I have enjoyed immensely
hmm.
and
Beautiful.
was grateful to be a part of.
Mhm. Justice Bernstein, thank you so much for being a part of
Oh,
this.
thank
Thank
you.
you for
This is a great experience. I mean, being with you was such a great experience because it really emanates that energy and that enthusiasm and that spirituality that Chabad is about.
you've given us so much to think about, with your persistence, your devotion, your dedication, and your drive for mission. So I really appreciate someone who's doing so much despite your disability or maybe because of them.
I
It's
think
what
most people
you're
you
being
come
pushed to.
across with disabilities, I think they all do the same thing. I think that
Mhm.
everyone that has these challenges is out doing their own thing in their own way and doing it well.
Do you realize, like, how special you are in what you're doing?
No, not really. I just think that, this is as long as the day gets well used and I'm able to do something meaningful with it and something positive and constructive and creative and uplifting with it, as long as the day is well used, that lets me feel like all is well and all is right and all is good. And that gives me the pride and the joy to kind of hopefully keep doing this kind of work and hopefully having this kind of meaning.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you, Justice Bernstein, for joining us and for everything that you're doing.
And thank you for this program. Keep it up. Keep doing this kind of stuff. People love it. So keep doing
Thank
what you're doing as well. And hopefully we'll see each other in the community.
I hope so. Thank
All
you. Thank
right.
you so much.
Thank you now. Bye bye.
Wow. If you've ever woken up on the wrong side of the bed feeling like you just can't, or life is too much, or life is too hard, this was definitely an interview to watch. I mean, Justice Bernstein is just incredible in terms of what he's doing. Not only did he become a lawyer, which as a blind person was very difficult, and then not only was that enough and all the good deeds and all the good work he was doing as a lawyer pro bono, but he became a justice. And he not only did he become a justice, but he also runs marathons. He's so driven and pushed to keep on doing things and to help people, which is really incredible. And he continued to do so even after his accident, where he is now in a state of pain because of the accident, where his body was, as he explained, was shattered. And yet he wakes up every morning thinking about his mission in life, his purpose in life, and sees his blindness as something that propels him to help others and to make this world a better place for others. So I found that interview very inspiring. I mean, there's so many times when we feel down and we feel like I can't and it's too much and life's too hard. And when you look at people like him who are just pushing themselves and persevering and dedicating themselves to the mission of improving people's lives in this world and connecting with others, it leaves you a lot of food for thought. That's what I took from this interview. I'd love to hear what you did. Thank you for watching. Please make sure that you are subscribed to Chabad.org/extraordinary to make sure you get these interviews in your inbox. You can watch us as well on all podcast platforms, on YouTube, and on Chabad.org. Thank you for watching, and thank you for being a part of this extraordinary community.